I spoke boldly, freely, in a word. I spoke with passion. I concealed nothing, nothing of even of my weakness. I alluded to the romantic circumstances of our first meeting, even to the glances which had passed between us. I went so far as to say I felt assured of her love. Well, I offered this assurance, and my own intensity of devotion, as two excuses for my otherwise unpardonable conduct. As a third, I spoke of my fear that she might quit the city before I could have the opportunity of a formal introduction, and I concluded with the most wildly enthusiastic epistle ever penned, with a frank declaration of my worldly circumstances, of my affluence, and with an offer of my heart and of my hand. And it came in agony of expectation. I awaited the reply. After what seemed the lapse of a century, it came. Yes, actually came. Romantic as this all may appear, I really received a letter from the Madame Lalande, the beautiful, the wealthy, the idolized Madame Lalande. Her eyes, her magnificent eyes, had not belied her noble heart. Like a true Frenchwoman as she was, she had obeyed the frank dictates of her reason, the generous impulses of her nature. Despising the conventional pruderies of the world, she had not scorned my proposals. She had not sheltered herself in silence. She had not returned my letter unopened. She had even sent me in reply one pen by her own exquisite fingers. It ran thus: Monsieur Simpson will pardon me for not compose the beautiful tongue of his country so well as might. It is only late that I am arrived, and not yet have the opportunity for to lay tutor. But this apology for the menier, I will now say that, alas, Monsieur Simpson, have guessed, but the too true. Need I say more? Alas, am I not ready to speak? De too much? Eugene Lande. This noble-spirited note I kissed a million times, and committed, no doubt, on its account, 1,000 other extravagances I have now escaped my memory. Still Talbot would not return. Alas, could he formed even the vaguest idea of the suffering his absence had occasioned his friend? Would not his sympathizing nature have flown immediately to my relief? Still, however, he came not. I wrote. He replied. He was detained by urgent business, but would shortly return. He begged me not to be impatient, to moderate my transport, to read soothing books, to drink nothing stronger than hock, and to bring the consolations of philosophy to my aid. The fool! If he could not come himself, why in the name of everything rational could he not have enclosed me a letter of presentation? I wrote him again, and entreated him to forward one forthwith. My letter was returned by that footman, and with the following endorsement in pencil: the scoundrel had joined his master in the country. Left S yesterday, for parts unknown, did not say where or when we'll be back. So, thought best to return letter, knowing your handwriting, as how you is always more or less in a hurry. Yours sincerely, Stubbs. After this, it is needless to say that I devoted it to the infernal deities, both master and valet, but there was little use in anger, and no consolation at all in complaint. But I had yet a resource left in my constitutional audacity. Hitherto it had served me well, and I now resolved to make it avail me to the end. Besides, after the correspondence which had passed between us, what act of mere informality could I commit within bounds that ought to be regarded as indecorous by Madame Lalande? Since the affair of the letter, I had been in the habit of watching her house, and thus discovered that about twilight it was her custom to promenade, attended only by a negro in livery, in a public square overlooked by her windows. Here, amid the luxuriant and shadowing groves, in the gray gloom of a sweet midsummer evening, I observed my opportunity and accosted her. The better to deceive the servant in attendance, I did this with the assured air of an old and familiar acquaintance. With the presence of mind purely Parisian, she took the cue at once, and to greet me, held out with the most bewitchingly little hands. The valet at once fell into the rear, and now, with the hearts full to overflowing, we discoursed long and unreservedly of our love. As Madame Lalande spoke English even less fluently than she wrote it, our conversation was necessarily in French. In this sweet tongue, so adapted to passion, I gave loose to the impetuous enthusiasm of my nature, and with all the eloquence I could command, besought her to consent to an immediate marriage. At this impatience she smiled. She urged the old story of decorum, that bugbear which deters so many from bliss, until the opportunity for bliss has forever gone by. I had most imprudently made it known among my friends, she observed, that I desired her acquaintance, thus that I did not possess it. Thus again, there was no possibility of concealing the date of my first knowledge of each other. And then she averted, with a blush, to the most extreme recency of this date. To wed immediately would be improper, would be indecorous, would be hauteur. All this she said with a charming air of naivete, which enraptured while it grieved and convinced me. She even went so far as to accuse me, laughingly, of rashness, of imprudence. She bade me remember that I really even knew not who she was, what were her prospects, her connections, her standing in society. She begged me, but with a sigh, to reconsider my proposal, and termed my love as an infatuation, a will-o'-the-wisp, a fancy or a fantasy of the moment, a baseless and an unstable creation rather of the imagination rather than of the heart. These things she uttered as the shadows of the sweet twilight gathered darkly and more darkly around us, and then, with a gentle pressure of her fairy-like hand, overthrew, in a single sweet instant, all the argumentative fabric she had reared. I replied as best I could, as only a true lover can. I spoke at length and perseveringly of my devotion, of my passion, of her exceedingly beauty, and of my own enthusiastic admiration. In conclusion, I dwelt with a convincing energy upon the perils that encompass the course of love, that course of true love that never did run smooth, and thus deduced the manifest danger of rendering that course unnecessarily long. This latter argument seemed finally to soften the rigor of her determination. She relented, but there was yet an obstacle. She said, while she felt that she assured I was especially so, in mentioning it, she saw that she must make a sacrifice of her feelings. Still, for me, every sacrifice should be made. She alluded to the topic of age. Was I aware Was I fully aware of the discrepancy between us? That the age of the husband should surpass by a few years, even by 15 or 20, the age of the wife, was regarded by the world as admissible, and indeed as even proper. But she had always entertained the belief that the years of the wife should never exceed those of the number of the husband. A discrepancy of this unnatural kind gave me rise too frequently, alas, to a life of unhappiness. Now she was aware that my own age did not exceed 2 and 20, and I, on the contrary, perhaps was not aware that the years of my Eugenie extended very considerably beyond that sum. About this there was a nobility of soul, a dignity of candor, which enchanted me, which eternally riveted my chains. I could scarcely restrain my excessive transport which possessed me. My sweetest Eugenie, I cried, what is all this about which you are discoursing? Your years surpass in some measure my own, but what then? The customs of the world are so many conventional follies. To those who love them ourselves, in what respect differs a year from an hour? I am 22. You say, granted, indeed, you may as well call me at once 23. Now you yourself, my dearest Eugenie, can have numbered no more than then. Here I paused for an instant, in the expectation that Madame Lalande would interrupt me by supplying her true age. But a Frenchwoman is seldom direct, and has always, by way of answer to an embarrassing inquiry, some little practical reply of her own. In the present instance, Eugenie, who for a few moments past had seemed to be searching for something in her bosom, at length let fall upon the grass a miniature, which I immediately picked up and presented to her. Keep it, she said, with one of her most ravishing smiles. Keep it for my sake, for the sake of her whom it too flatteringly represents. Besides, upon the back of the trinket you may discover perhaps the very information you seem to desire. It is now, to be sure, growing rather dark, but you can examine it at your leisure in the morning. In the meantime, you shall escort me home tonight. My friends are about holding a little musical levee. I can promise you, too, some good singing. We French are not nearly so punctilious as you Americans, and I shall have no difficulty in smuggling you in the character of an old acquaintance. With this she took my arm, and I attended her home. The mansion was quite a fine one, and I believe furnished in good taste. Of this latter point, however, I am scarcely qualified to judge, for it was just dark as we arrived, and in American mansions of the better sort, light seldom, during the heat of summer, makes their appearance as this, the most pleasant period of the day. In about an hour after my arrival, to be sure, a single shaded solar lamp was lit in the principal dark drawing room. In this apartment, I could see, was arranged with unusual good taste and even splendor, but two other rooms of the suite, and in which company chiefly assembled, remained during the whole evening in a very agreeable shadow. This is a well-conceived custom, giving the party at least a choice of lighter shade, and one which our friends over the water could not do better than immediately adopt. The evening thus spent was unquestionably the most delicious of my life. Madame Lalande had not overrated the musical abilities of her friends, and the singing I heard had never heard excelled in any private circle out of Vienna. The instrumental performance were many of superior talents. The vocalists were chiefly ladies, and no individual sang less than well. At length, upon a peremptory call from Madame Lalande, She arose at once, without affectation or demur, from the chaise lounge upon which she sat by my side, and, accompanied by one or two gentlemen and her female friend of the opera, repaired to the piano in the main drawing-room. I would have escorted her myself, but I felt that under the circumstances of my introduction into the house, I had better remain unobserved as where I was. I was thus deprived of the pleasure of seeing, although not of hearing, her sing.